Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Haunted Dolls and Curses video. Well, it's definitely been a good success when it comes to this all new series. Thank you everyone for your nice comments and the good views, especially with my first video. So there's definitely a fan interest as far as these haunted dolls and these curses. Much like myself, I definitely love these kind of topics. So I'll definitely be doing more videos on this, such as this one here. And I'll be doing some future suggestions videos as well. So please be on the lookout for those too. This one has to do with yet another haunted doll, in this case, one that's located in British Columbia. And those of you that are there, you'll have a chance to see it because it's actually placed within a museum. It's also a doll that's fraught with many haunted things, such as that uneasy stare that it gives, noises that it also does, the feeling that you're not alone when you're with this doll, stuff being moved, or the doll itself being moved whenever no one is around. Lots and lots of fascinating things to talk about, and it has to do with this. You're looking at it now. It's known as Mandy the Haunted Doll. So let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating info associated with this unique haunted doll. So what is this Mandy doll? What is it? In other words, it's another haunted doll that who knows where the origins come from. They're apparently very sparse, not too much in terms of fine detailed information, and even then the information that I'll give here in just a moment is basically just a lot of unverified stuff. So it's definitely out there when it comes to finding out its origin as far as the truth, but I'll still mention at least what the most common theory is tied to it. But yes, this Mandy the Doll was a doll that was apparently just given one day out of the blue in 1991 to the museum known as the Quesnel and District Museum, which you're looking at now. So again, as I mentioned a minute ago, this is the museum there in British Columbia. Those of you that are fans of any kind of haunted dolls, you can go there to this day and you'll find it there. You may have to look around a little bit because apparently the museum likes to place it within different areas every now and then. But even some of the latest pictures I was able to find showcase that it's still there. But at least back then in 1991, somebody, an anonymous owner, went there to that museum. She brought along her young daughter and they were carrying this doll. The way I was reading this information, they hastily wanted to give up this doll. They wanted to get rid of it, but not destroy it at the same time. So apparently whoever that anonymous woman was, she gave it to the museum, and the museum at first didn't think much of it. They just pretty much just saw it as an old doll. It's a great way to showcase an archive of sorts, because apparently the origin of this doll was that it must have been created based on the design and the look and the material sometime in Germany between the years 1910 and 1920. But as far as who was the original, like, let's say, owner, at least from the very beginning, and then who came afterward, all of that is still pretty anonymous. Even again, this woman, whoever donated it to the museum, but when she got rid of it, she just stated that it used to belong to her grandmother. Presumably her grandmother had passed away, and then her grandmother's possessions came to her daughter. And then when that happened, whoever her daughter, in other words, this new owner, this woman, and then when this woman started experiencing these weird things that I'll mention in just a moment, then that's when she decided to get rid of it. So again, at least as far as the museum, they didn't care necessarily about it. To them, they just saw it as a brand new archive, something to place in there. And so they actually put Mandy the doll within a plastic bag. The idea was that they were going to do a lot of repairs to it, because you're looking at some of the pictures of it now. It is old, it is brittle, it's faded in certain places, it has clothing that looks like it needs to be refreshed or rewashed. But the most creepiest thing is, of course, the face. Through the passing of time, whatever happened with the face and the plastic there, it just started to have some kind of crack. And the way it looks so unusual and so creepy is the fact that this crack actually goes on the doll's right eye. You can see it almost like a leer of sorts. Like it's almost like a token, let's say, pirate or bad guy or someone else in the movies, where they have like this giant scar going across one of their eyes, such as the case here with this Mandy doll. And inadvertently, this crack also makes the eye pop out a little bit more. And again, that just gives it a creepy feeling too. So in any case, the museum, whoever the owners or the staff were there at the time, they placed it in that plastic bag so that way the museum staff could start working on the repairs. That's day one, essentially, when the creepy, haunting stuff started to happen there in the museum because the staff stated that for a couple of days, whatever was happening inside the bag, they swore that they would hear the bag rustle, almost as if something was moving inside of it. Obviously, the only thing inside the actual bag was Mandy the doll, but still, they stated that they heard something moving about. They couldn't explain why necessarily. Also, I wanted to mention this too. The name Mandy the doll apparently comes from whoever that anonymous owner was. So I would imagine that the grandmother originally named it Mandy, and then that's how the name came to be. But back to at least the plastic bag, once they decided to actually take out the doll from the bag and start the repairs, that's when things escalated. They put it into some kind of area there in the museum, and when they moved it about, they realized all of a sudden that it was changed. The position of it, in other words, was in a different location. Obviously, there were no other people there at the time it happened that night, but lo and behold, whenever they went there the next morning, it had moved its position. On top of that, whenever they would come into any location that the doll was in, like let's say it was placed in a particular room, whatever was in that room in terms of various objects, the next day they were scattered about throughout the entire place. And yet, in a weird irony, the doll actually was in the same position. So now, instead of the doll moving about, apparently things around the room were moving about on their own. And again, it was a situation where nobody could explain why, because no one was there in the museum at night. It was closed. It was not like there was some security there or any other person like maintenance that was moving about. No, the entire museum was just completely closed, so no one would do it. It was weird because apparently the staff there were stating the way it looked as far as the things that were moving about, it's almost as if there was a child. Like, let's say a child had grabbed some things and in some kind of tantrum or other type of emotional outburst, they just started throwing things about. That's the way they described it as far as this type of situation. But still, other things started to happen as far as Mandy the doll in the museum. For example, staff stated that whenever they would move, like walk around themselves, there was the idea that this thing would just look at them. It would look at them, and in some cases, they almost swore that the eyes would follow them very imperceptibly, but still, it was almost as if the eyes were moving about, looking at them as if there was truly someone within the doll. Also, a lot of electrical things within the museum would malfunction. New items, in other words, that were brought on board anytime they were placed anywhere near around the doll's area, it would not have a long life. It would just basically bust. And so that's why another reason why they kept moving the doll about to different museums, because of the different parts of the museum, because of what was occurring. Also, another thing too, people started to feel sad, like they started to feel uneasy whenever they were working around the doll. Even this, they tried to put a little lamb, like some kind of toy, to Mandy the doll. They're now thinking at this point, I don't know if they were taking it seriously or if some of them were just using it as a precaution, but they started to think that maybe if they could placate the doll, like some of them were thinking that this was truly real, like this is something involving a haunted doll, then maybe if they gave her some kind of lamb toy, that would help. And what would happen though was the glass case that the doll was placed in along with the actual little lamb toy, the next morning they would find the case untouched, but yet the lamb was outside of it. And so obviously the little doll wasn't having it too. Speaking of the glass case too, this one actually creeped me out the most. When people would walk about, they would hear tapping within the glass case that Mandy was placed. And then when they turned, they would see her hand up against the glass. And obviously nobody had placed her hand on the glass, but there it was, and obviously there was no one there around it to make that noise in terms of the tapping, but they had heard it, and then that's when they saw that that was her making some kind of notice or something like that. That's another thing I wanted to mention too. All these paranormal activities associated with the doll, the good news is none of it seems to be bad or evil or anything along those lines. If anything, it all ties into the idea that it's almost like a child throwing a tantrum. Apparently, Mandy the Doll, if you either go work there at the museum or if you go see her, you have to treat her like a child. Like she actually wants attention. She wants to be able to be happy. She wants to have you, in other words, be there with her, looking at her, giving her undivided attention, that kind of stuff. And if you do that, then you're fine. Otherwise, apparently, she gets upset, but she doesn't go like all out exorcist evil, nothing like that. No, instead, it's just more along the lines of she'll just do a little bit of stuff here and there to get the attention she wants, and that's it. Now, as far as the origins, the true origins of Mandy, like how did she become haunted? There was some psychic that was apparently brought on board by the museum to try to find out what occurred. All of this, of course, is still anonymous. Nobody knows who that psychic was, when that happened, but apparently the psychic was able to get some kind of legend built up. Even then, this is still pretty loose. There's no concrete details. But the way the story goes was at one point there was this farm somewhere out there way back when. Nobody knows the location, nobody knows the time period or who owned it. But there was a man that would walk by the farm and he would hear the crying of a child. And so obviously thinking to himself that this is something that he wants to check out because of the emergency involved, he went to the abandoned farm because it was abandoned. Nobody was living there. So that's another thing that raised a red flag. And when he went inside, he realized that the crying was coming from the cellar. And so when he went into the cellar, that's where I've read two versions of this legend. One is that he found the body of a young girl already dead, but the doll was lying next to her. And who knows how that poor young girl ended up there. No one knows her name, the situation involving behind her demise there. But still, this doll was there, and somehow her spirit was able to go into that doll, and that's essentially who Mandy the Doll is now. The other version that I read is that there was no young girl there. Instead, there was the doll right then and there. Like, in other words, the doll was just found, but that's where apparently the crying was coming from. And so that's where the whoever that young man was, got the doll, and then somehow it changed hands and it went to the grandmother and then to the mysterious owner that dropped off the museum, and what we have now as far as the doll being there. So those are at least the urban legends tied to Mandy the Doll. But again, none of it is concrete. None of it is 100% solid. You would have to take it with a grain of salt when it comes to this stuff. In fact, that's apparently what happened with that anonymous owner, that woman who came in 1991 and dropped off the doll at the museum. Eventually, she was tracked down by someone from the museum, and she confessed of sorts. Like, she stated that, yes, the reason she got rid of it was because she kept hearing that crying coming from her household, and she wanted to make sure that she got rid of it, but in a good way, giving it to the museum, and in that way, it doesn't haunt her anymore. But yes, if you wanted to go straight to that doll to see it, yes, go to that Quinzel Museum. You'll be able to see it to this day. I imagine that they have it still in some kind of glass, and you're able to at least get as close as you want without opening it and then taking pictures and so forth. But if you do, again, treat it like it's a real child. Treat it like someone is there, because that's, again, the whole notion is that this doll is truly haunted by whoever that poor young girl was. And so to this day, she's still living there, still looking at you if you go up to that location, and if you treat it with respect, and you'll be fine. In fact, I was reading it the same way is almost like Peggy the Doll over there at the Zach Bagans Haunted Museum, and how you're supposed to treat it with respect whenever you go into the room. That's the same way I read it here as well. But if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, please post those comments below. Anybody have a lucky chance to go to that museum in the past? If so, I'd love to hear what your experiences are. Share it with everyone here. Or again, if you're there in the British Columbia area, you'll have a good chance of being able to go see that museum. Once you do, please come back to this video and then post the comments below. All right, everyone. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.